Queen's final command before death: no doctor may ever touch her body. Not for burial preparation, not for any reason. What was hidden beneath the royal robes that was so dangerous it could destroy an entire dynasty? By the end of this video, you'll discover the forensic truth she took to her grave and why it would have changed history forever. Picture this: a monarch lying on her deathbed, surrounded by trembling advisors, and instead of discussing succession or offering final prayers, she issues one absolute command that sends chills through the room. No physician will touch her body after death. No examination, no autopsy, no inspection of any kind. This wasn't a modest request or a religious preference. This was a royal decree delivered with the force of law and backed by threats of severe punishment for anyone who dared disobey. The physicians present knew this wasn't normal protocol. Royal bodies were typically prepared for burial with meticulous care, examined to determine cause of death, and documented for historical records. But this queen was different. She understood something her advisors didn't. Her body held evidence that could unravel everything she had built. As she took her final breath, the secret she guarded became locked away forever, transforming her corpse into the most protected crime scene in history. What could possibly be so catastrophic that a woman who ruled nations with an iron fist would use her dying moments to ensure no one ever discovered the truth? The historical records paint a disturbing picture when examined through a forensic lens. Court documents reveal that this wasn't a sudden decision made in the confusion of impending death. This was the culmination of a lifetime of carefully orchestrated concealment. Throughout her reign, the queen had systematically dismissed physicians who showed too much curiosity about her health. She refused treatments that would require physical examination, claiming divine protection or superior knowledge. When illness struck, she would isolate herself completely, allowing no medical professionals near her chambers. Foreign ambassadors noted the peculiarity in their letters home, describing how the queen's health was always discussed in vague, non-specific terms. There were no detailed medical bulletins like those issued for other monarchs of the era. Even her closest ladies-in-waiting were kept at a distance during certain times, never allowed to see her in states of undress that might reveal something extraordinary. The pattern was clear to modern researchers examining these accounts. This was active suppression of information. Someone was running interference between the queen's physical reality and the world's perception of it. The question that haunts forensic historians is simple but explosive. What was she hiding that required such elaborate, decades-long deception? The obsession intensified as she aged, reaching paranoid levels that suggest the secret was becoming harder to maintain. In her final years, she wore increasingly elaborate clothing with multiple layers, making it physically impossible for anyone to glimpse her body even accidentally. She banned mirrors from certain rooms and controlled all artistic representations of her image with fanatical precision. Any portrait that didn't meet her approval was destroyed. The few physicians she allowed near her were sworn to absolute secrecy under penalty of death, and several mysteriously disappeared after attending to her. Their medical notes conveniently lost to history. This wasn't just royal vanity or the eccentricity of old age. This was systematic evidence destruction by someone who knew exactly what forensic examination would reveal. The Deathbed Command was simply the final piece of a masterful cover-up that had been in motion for decades. But what happens when you dig deeper into what exactly she was protecting? That's where the story becomes truly disturbing. Modern forensic analysis reveals red flags that would make any investigator's instinct scream cover-up. Start with the most obvious anomaly: the complete absence of reliable medical documentation. For a monarch of her status and era, this is virtually unprecedented. Kings and queens had personal physicians who kept detailed journals of treatments, symptoms, and physical observations. These records were considered valuable historical documents. Yet for this queen, there's almost nothing. The few medical notes that survived are suspiciously vague, describing ailments in poetic language rather than clinical terms. One physician's journal contains an entire entry that was physically cut out with a blade, leaving only the surrounding text about trivial matters. Someone went through historical records with surgical precision, removing anything that might provide clues about her physical condition. Forensic document experts have analyzed the surviving papers and found evidence of deliberate tampering. Pages removed, passages scratched out so thoroughly the parchment was damaged, entire volumes missing from sequential collections. This wasn't accidental loss over time. This was intentional destruction of evidence that began during her lifetime and continued after her death. The burial arrangements add another layer of forensic suspicion. Unlike other monarchs whose funerals were elaborate, well-documented affairs with multiple witnesses to every stage of preparation, this queen's burial was rushed and secretive. The body was sealed in a coffin within hours of death, before rigor mortis would typically even set in fully. The coffin was then encased in lead, a material that prevents decomposition and makes later examination nearly impossible without destroying the remains. No embalmers were allowed to work on the body, which was extraordinary for royalty of that period. The usual practice involved removing organs, treating the body with preservatives, and creating a presentable corpse for lying in state. None of that happened here. The sealed coffin was placed in the royal vault under armed guard, with strict orders that it never be opened. Centuries later, when historians attempted to examine royal remains for research purposes, this particular tomb was the only one explicitly protected by legal decree. Even today, there are restrictions preventing forensic examination. The question becomes unavoidable. What would an autopsy have revealed that was worth this extraordinary effort to prevent? Perhaps most telling is the pattern of witness elimination. Everyone who might have seen something compromising had their testimony either controlled or silenced. The midwives who attended her birth died under suspicious circumstances before she reached adulthood. One in a house fire, another from sudden illness. A third simply vanished from historical records as if she never existed. The servants who dressed her throughout her life were rotated frequently and never allowed to work together or discuss their duties. Those who served the longest were later found to have received enormous payments, hush money by any other name. One lady in waiting left a cryptic diary entry before her death. "What I have seen must die with me, for the truth would shake the very foundations of the realm." She never specified what she saw, but the entry was made after decades of service to the queen. These weren't coincidences. This was a systematic program to ensure that anyone with potentially damaging knowledge was either bought off, intimidated into silence, or removed from the equation entirely. The forensic pattern points to something so significant that it justified what amounts to multiple cover-ups and possibly even murders. But cover-ups of what exactly? The theories that emerge when you follow this evidence are genuinely shocking. Here's where forensic history takes a dark turn into territory most scholars are afraid to discuss publicly: the biological impostor theory. Examine the evidence without bias and a disturbing possibility emerges. What if this queen was not biologically who she claimed to be? What if the person wearing the crown was anatomically male or possessed ambiguous genitalia that would have invalidated the entire royal succession? In an era where gender was considered divinely ordained and immutable, discovering that a queen was biologically male or intersex would be catastrophic. It would mean every law she signed was invalid, every treaty she negotiated was void, every child she claimed as heir was illegitimate. The entire political structure built over decades would collapse instantly. This wasn't just about personal embarrassment. This was about the legal foundation of a kingdom. Forensic experts examining the pattern of concealment note, it matches exactly what you'd expect from someone hiding a fundamental biological secret. The refusal to let doctors examine her reproductive system, the elaborate clothing that obscured body shape, the ban on any physical inspection after death, it all fits. Consider the historical context. Royal succession was based entirely on biological sex and bloodline. If this queen was born with what we now call complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, she would appear female externally but possess XY chromosomes and internal testes instead of ovaries and a uterus. She might not have known herself until puberty, when menstruation never began. In the medical understanding of that era, this would be unexplainable and terrifying. Or perhaps she was born with ambiguous genitalia, what Renaissance physicians called a hermaphrodite, and her family made a choice at birth to raise her as female to secure succession rights. Either scenario creates the same problem. A physical examination would reveal the truth. Modern forensic analysis of portraits shows some interesting anomalies. A strong jawline, broad shoulders, and body proportions that some researchers argue are more consistent with male skeletal structure. Critics dismiss this as artistic style, but the pattern is there. The queen allegedly never menstruated, never bore children despite pressure to produce heirs, and displayed what courtiers described as unwomanly vigor and strength. These could all be explained by variations in sexual development that would be visible during autopsy. The implications shake the foundation of royal legitimacy itself. If forensic examination proved the queen was biologically male or intersex, every history book would need rewriting. Her entire reign would be recontextualized as one of the most successful deceptions in political history. And here's the truly brilliant part. By banning examination, she made sure we'd never know for certain. The secret died with her, preserved by the very prohibition she put in place. Modern DNA analysis could theoretically resolve the question, but the legal and political protections around royal remains make that impossible. She understood something profound about power. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in revealing truth, but in controlling who gets to know it. The biological impostor theory remains just that. A theory impossible to prove or disprove because the evidence is literally locked in a sealed tomb. But the forensic pattern of concealment is so pronounced that investigators can't ignore the possibility. What else could drive such extreme measures to prevent medical examination? The next theory offers an equally disturbing answer. Shift your focus from biology to pathology, and another forensic nightmare emerges: genetic deformity. Royal families of this era practiced intermarriage to keep bloodlines pure, which meant cousins marrying cousins across generations. The genetic consequences were catastrophic, creating a cocktail of hereditary diseases and physical abnormalities that haunted European monarchy. We know this from the rare cases where remains were examined before such practices were banned. Hemophilia that caused uncontrollable bleeding, porphyria that drove monarchs mad, bone disorders that twisted skeletons into grotesque shapes. Now imagine being a queen with the genetic burden of generations of inbreeding, knowing your body carried visible evidence of this corruption. A curved spine that created a noticeable hump, limbs of unequal length, facial deformities that cosmetics and distance could hide in life, but would be obvious on a corpse. In an era when physical perfection was seen as evidence of divine favor, deformity was proof of God's displeasure. A deformed monarch was an invalid monarch, regardless of their mental capacity or political skill. The historical records contain tantalizing hints of something physically wrong. Foreign ambassadors who met her describe always seeing her at a distance, never in close proximity where details would be apparent. She wore high collars that concealed her neck and jaw, long sleeves that covered her arms completely, and platform shoes that evened out any height discrepancy. Portraits from different periods show subtle changes in how she positioned herself, always angled to hide one side of her body. One visiting diplomat noted she kept her left hand hidden throughout their entire audience, never once raising it into view. Was she concealing a deformity? Fingers webbed together or missing entirely. A withered arm like later royals would display openly, but which she couldn't afford to reveal. The medical understanding of genetics didn't exist in her time, but she didn't need to understand the science to know she was different. She could see her own reflection and recognize that her body deviated from the norm in ways that would destroy her authority if discovered. The ban on examination makes perfect sense from this perspective. She was protecting not just her own legacy, but preventing future scholars from documenting exactly what genetic damage royal inbreeding could cause. Here's where it gets forensically fascinating. Skeletal deformities leave traces even on fully clothed bodies. The way someone walks, how they hold themselves, patterns of wear on clothing, all of these create evidence that trained observers can detect. The Queen's household staff had to be carefully managed to prevent gossip about anything they might notice. She reportedly changed her inner circle frequently, never allowing anyone to observe her long enough to piece together the full picture. When she traveled, she required modifications to carriages and furniture that historians initially attributed to comfort preferences, but which might actually have accommodated physical abnormalities. A throne with higher than normal armrests to support weakened limbs, a bed constructed to specific measurements that differed from standard royal furniture, shoes made with uneven soles that servants were told to destroy after her death. Each detail suggests someone working around a physical limitation they couldn't publicly acknowledge. The deathbed ban on examination becomes the final protection against forensic discovery. Without an autopsy, there would be no official record of deformity. Future generations could believe whatever flattering lies were told about her. But preventing that examination required absolute control until the very end. And she achieved it, leaving us with nothing but speculation about what exactly her skeleton would have revealed. Now we enter even darker territory. What if the Queen's body bore evidence not of genetic accident, but of deliberate human action? What if her flesh carried scars from rituals and practices that would condemn her as a heretic and occultist? This sounds like sensational fiction until you examine the historical context. The era she lived in was saturated with alchemy, mysticism, and secret societies. Monarchs consulted astrologers, employed court magicians, and participated in ceremonies that church authorities would have considered diabolical. We know this happened because records of trials and confessions exist, just not for ruling monarchs who had the power to suppress such information. What if this queen went further than most? What if she participated in blood rituals, ritual scarification, or alchemical experiments on her own body? The scars would tell the story more clearly than any written confession. Consider what forensic examination of ritual scarring would reveal. Deliberate cuts made in symbolic patterns, burns from ceremonial brands, marks that align with occult diagrams found in forbidden texts of the period. This wasn't primitive superstition. Many intelligent, educated people of the era believed that physical transformation through ritual could grant power, knowledge, or immortality. If a queen believed cutting specific symbols into her flesh would strengthen her reign or grant her supernatural insight, she might very well do it. The secrecy becomes necessary not just for her own reputation, but to protect her entire court from accusations of witchcraft and heresy. A single scar in the right pattern could be interpreted as a witch's mark, evidence of a pact with demonic forces. In her time, such accusations had toppled monarchs and ignited civil wars. The discovery of ritual scarring on a queen's corpse wouldn't just destroy her historical reputation, it would validate every conspiracy theory about secret societies controlling the throne. Her heirs would be tainted by association, her advisors hunted down and executed, her entire legacy burned as evidence of evil. The ban on examination protects not just her body, but everyone associated with her. The evidence for ritual involvement is circumstantial but compelling. She maintained relationships with known alchemists and mystics, providing them protection and funding when church authorities wanted them arrested. Her private chambers contained texts that were later banned and destroyed, books of ceremonial magic and ancient rituals that had been smuggled from Constantinople and Egypt. She wore jewelry with symbols that experts in occult history recognize as protective sigils and ritual markers. None of this proves she used ritual scarification, but it establishes that she moved in circles where such practices were known and possibly encouraged. One account from a dismissed servant claims to have seen marks upon her skin that formed patterns no natural accident could create. But the servant was later declared insane and locked away for the remainder of his life. His testimony was discredited, his written statement destroyed. The pattern of evidence suppression fits. If ritual scars existed on her body, the autopsy ban ensured they'd never be documented, never become ammunition for religious opponents or future historians seeking to condemn her. The secret was quite literally taken to the grave, hidden beneath layers of royal protection that persist centuries later. But there's yet another dimension to this mystery that ties everything together. Let's examine the cold political calculus behind the examination ban: succession crisis prevention. Forget mysterious identities and ritual scars for a moment, and focus on pure reproductive biology. What if the autopsy would have revealed something that every monarch fears most? Proof of infertility? Not the inability to conceive, which could be attributed to many factors, but anatomical evidence that conception was impossible from birth. A missing uterus, underdeveloped reproductive organs, or structural abnormalities that would prove she could never have produced biological heirs. In the brutal politics of royal succession, this would be devastating. Any children she claimed as her own would instantly be challenged as illegitimate. Rival claimants to the throne would have forensic proof that the official heirs were frauds, bastards smuggled in and presented as royal blood. The kingdom would descend into civil war within days of the revelation. Think about the mechanics of royal succession in her era. Legitimacy flowed through biological connection. Your right to rule came from your parents' body producing yours through natural birth. Break that chain, and the entire structure collapses. Now imagine you're a queen who knows from adolescence that your body cannot perform this fundamental royal function. You understand that admitting this means the end of your dynasty before it even begins. So what do? You might arrange for a child from another source, a servant's baby, a cousin's illegitimate offspring, anyone with plausible royal blood, and present it as your own. You fake a pregnancy, retreat during the crucial months, and emerge with an heir. It's been suggested this happened with multiple historical monarchs, though proving it requires examining the queen's body to show she never gave birth. The anatomical evidence would be clear. A woman who has borne children shows specific changes to the cervix, the pelvic bones, the abdominal wall. A woman who has never given birth retains different anatomical markers. An autopsy would reveal the truth instantly. If this queen presented heirs while being physically incapable of pregnancy, that's not just fraud, it's treason against the entire concept of legitimate monarchy. The forensic evidence supports this theory uncomfortably well. Her pregnancies were notoriously secretive, with very few witnesses to actual births. The children appeared with minimal documentation and were immediately surrounded by loyal retainers who controlled all access and information. Rival courts whispered that the babies looked nothing like the queen or her husband, but such gossip was dangerous and easy to dismiss as political slander. What couldn't be dismissed was the queen's obsessive protection of her body in death. If autopsy revealed she died virgo intacta, never having experienced pregnancy or childbirth, the political implications would be nuclear. Every treaty signed on behalf of her heirs, every alliance built on their expected succession, every lord who swore loyalty to the bloodline, all of it would be based on fraud. The kingdom would face external invasion from enemies claiming the throne was vacant, and internal rebellion from nobles feeling betrayed. The examination ban wasn't paranoia. It was a calculated political decision to prevent the autopsy from becoming the match that burned the kingdom to ashes. And it worked perfectly, leaving future historians with questions but no answers. Which brings us to the final, most haunting aspect of this mystery. We've explored the theories: biological imposter, genetic deformity, ritual evidence, reproductive fraud. But here's what makes this case truly extraordinary from a forensic perspective. The queen understood exactly what she was doing. This wasn't panic or superstition. This was methodical evidence control by someone who grasped the power of information and the danger of physical proof. She lived in an era before forensic science existed as a formal discipline, yet she applied its principles in reverse. Instead of using evidence to reveal truth, she systematically prevented evidence from ever being examined. She understood that her body was a crime scene, and she controlled it with the same precision a modern criminal might use to eliminate DNA evidence. The ban on examination was the culmination of a lifetime of operational security that would impress modern intelligence agencies. Consider the sophistication of her approach. She didn't just forbid examination and hope for compliance. She built layers of protection, legal decrees backed by royal authority, loyal retainers who would enforce the ban even after her death, rapid burial procedures that prevented time for challenges or questions, physical barriers like lead coffin casings that made later examination destructive and obvious, and destruction of documentary evidence that might provide clues to what examination would have revealed. Each layer reinforced the others, creating a system so robust it has survived centuries of historical scrutiny. Forensic investigators call this defense in depth. Multiple overlapping security measures that ensure even if one fails, others protect the secret. She understood that her death would be the moment of greatest vulnerability, when she could no longer personally control who accessed her body. So she transformed her final command into a legal and practical fortress that outlived her by centuries. The sophistication suggests she had help, advisors who understood the risks and helped construct an unbreakable system of concealment. But who were they, and what did they know? That knowledge died with them, another thread cut to protect the secret. The legacy of her deception is a forensic puzzle that continues to frustrate historians. Modern technology could theoretically solve the mystery. DNA analysis, radiocarbon dating, isotope studies that reveal diet and health, medical imaging that could examine remains without disturbing them. All of these tools exist and have been used on other historical figures. But not her. The legal protections remain in force, backed by institutions that consider disturbing royal remains to be sacrilegious or politically destabilizing. Some argue this is appropriate respect for the dead. Others suggest it's the continuation of a cover-up. Modern authorities unconsciously or deliberately protecting secrets they don't even fully understand. What makes this particularly fascinating is that the Queen's strategy was so successful that we can't even agree on what was being hidden. Was it gender, deformity, ritual evidence, reproductive fraud, or something else entirely? Each theory fits the pattern of evidence, and none can be definitively ruled out. That ambiguity is itself part of the success. By hiding everything, she ensured we'd never know which specific secret drove the concealment. The forensic mystery has become self-protecting. So we arrive at the final truth of this case. The Queen won. Whatever her secret was, and it was clearly something she considered catastrophic enough to justify extraordinary measures, it remains protected. Her body lies in that sealed tomb, its secrets intact, while historians and forensic experts can only theorize and speculate. She transformed her death into a masterclass in information control, proving that with enough power and planning, you can take even explosive secrets to the grave. The irony is that the very extremity of her measures has guaranteed we'll never stop wondering. A simple burial with normal examination might have revealed something that could be explained away or forgotten. But the dramatic prohibition, the layers of protection, the obvious desperation to prevent discovery, these ensure that her mystery remains perpetually fascinating. Every generation rediscovers the question and tries to solve it with new tools and perspectives. And every generation fails, defeated by a dead woman's paranoia and brilliance. What can we learn from this forensic cold case? That bodies tell stories, and powerful people have always known this. That evidence control is itself a form of power, sometimes more important than military might or political alliances. That secrets can be successfully kept even across centuries if the protections are strong enough and the stakes are high enough. The Queen understood that her body was not just a corpse, but a collection of potential evidence that could destroy everything she'd built. So she locked it away with the same care she'd used to protect state secrets or military plans. From a forensic perspective, it's almost admirable. The perfect crime in some ways, because we can't even conclusively prove a crime occurred. We have patterns suggesting concealment, we have suspicious circumstances, we have motives and opportunities. But without the body, without examination, without physical evidence, we're left with educated guesses and historical circumstantial evidence. That's exactly what she wanted. The forbidden examination stands as a monument to the power of secrets and the lengths people will go to protect them. Somewhere beneath layers of earth and stone and lead, the answer to this mystery rests with bones that will never be examined, flesh long since turned to dust, but which in its time carried evidence considered too dangerous to ever reveal. The Queen calculated correctly. Her secret, whatever it was, has outlived her by centuries and will likely outlive all of us. We'll keep speculating, keep theorizing, keep applying new forensic techniques to the question, even if we can never apply them to the remains themselves. And maybe that's the real lesson. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved, not because the truth is unknowable, but because someone with enough power decided we'd never be allowed to know it. The Queen's final command echoes across the centuries, still protecting her, still hiding her truth, still keeping the forbidden examination exactly that, forbidden. If this mystery has gripped you the way it grips forensic historians, subscribe to this channel because we're just getting started uncovering the darkest secrets royal families tried to erase from history. Drop a comment telling me which theory you think is most likely: biological imposter, genetic deformity, ritual evidence, or succession fraud. Because I read every single one and your insights might reveal connections I've missed. And smash that like button if you want more deep dives into historical mysteries that challenge everything you thought you knew about power, secrecy, and the forbidden truths locked away in royal tombs. These stories need to be told, and your engagement ensures they reach people who are ready to question official histories and demand the truth.